Welcome, theater addicts. My name is Madison Steele, and today I'm going to be reviewing Box of Freedom, written and directed by Adelina Zhivago at Studio 1398 as a part of the 2018 Vancouver Fringe Festival. So the first thing that I want to say about this show is that it needed a trigger warning. It has content that involves sexual assault, which is portrayed graphically on stage. And it also deals with a lot of violence against women, some slut shaming, so definitely this show needed a trigger warning before going in to watch it. It's tough subject matter, and we're dealing with, you know, a refugee crisis, war, and a lot of violence against women, and so to even consider putting that kind of thing on stage, it can be quite a feat. So I want to commend everyone who's involved in this show for being brave enough to do that. Okay, so that being said, I had a few issues with the show that I just want to outline. So the first issue is communication and listening on stage. The second issue that I had involved the use of tech and set. And the third issue was the actual portrayal of sexual assault and violence against women that I saw in Box of Freedom. Okay, so let's dig into the first thing, or like unpack the box, if you will. So there was a lack of communication between the actors on stage. You know, there was dialogue, however, during the dialogue it didn't appear that they were actually hearing what the other person was saying. So there was a lack of communication in that way, and I think that there was also a lack of listening to the circumstances that were around them. This play is set in, you know, very, very extreme circumstances, and that just wasn't made clear to us based on the performances that we saw on stage. So it didn't really appear that the actors were listening to one another, they weren't really listening to their circumstances, and as an audience member, this kind of made me disengage from the action that was taking place. It made me feel pretty isolated, the performance felt pretty forced, and as an audience member, I found a lot of this show pretty difficult to watch and to engage with. So some of the ways that I could tell that the actors weren't really listening to each other was that there was a lot of fake crying in this show. It felt like throughout the play, a lot of the actors felt like this was a way that they could show the audience that they were experiencing some kind of emotion or having some kind of response to what was happening to them. So as I mentioned in some of my other reviews, but I'll just mention it again, I come from a theater background, a performance background, and so that's kind of the perspective that I have, or like, I guess the lens that I'm seeing everything through. And something that, you know, I learned that I thought was really, really valuable that I can share in this review is this quote that one of my professors shared with me. Emotion to the actor should be as sweat to the athlete. So emotion is meant to come as a natural response to genuinely engaging in the circumstances of what's happening in front of you. That it doesn't have to be forced, because if you're engaging in the circumstances and you're present with what's happening, the emotion is just gonna come. The next thing that I want to unpack out of the Box of Freedom is their use of tech and set. So they didn't have too much tech, and the set was pretty minimal, but the set also wasn't used for any purpose. It mostly just kind of stood in the background as a way to show the audience that they were in a box. It was a set of crates, and they were kind of stacked up behind the actors. So crates are like an amazing prop, and I've seen some shows where crates have been used like so well. There's so much that you can do with them. They can be chairs, you can, like anything that you can imagine, you can probably do with crates. So I was kind of hoping when I saw them that they would be used in some way, or that maybe they would kind of like do something interesting to give us a new perspective on the show, and that just never happened. So that in itself was kind of a bit of a disappointment. And just the general like lack of use of what they had available to them, you know, it can be kind of confusing as an audience member to see a whole bunch of things on stage that are there just as like decor or to show you where they are, unless this is kind of like maybe, you know, I don't know, like if it's showing like the time that something took place, or, you know, but ideally you want to get that from the circumstances that the actors show you, and, you know, and like maybe other creative means. It was just disappointing to see the set not used for anything other than just set dressing. Another thing that I noticed in terms of the tech and set was the music and the sort of sound design that was created for this show. The circumstances of the show, you know, were quite dark. And yes, you know, the plot was that there was this stand-up comedian and she was using comedy to kind of make her situation seem better. There wasn't any actual stand-up comedy in the show, and B, you know, the circumstances remained dark regardless of kind of how positive her outlook was. So, you know, and I think that you can use kind of like funny sounds or like interesting sounds, lighter sounds to contrast a dark setting. And I'm not sure if that was what was attempted, but, you know, so they used 70s sexy music, like the bounce chicka wow wow kind of thing. And they also used a lot of like sparkly fairy kind of sounds, like chimes or like a glitter sound. I don't really know how to describe it. But it just didn't seem to fit in with the narrative that was going on. It made it confusing, especially when it was used around the male character who sexually assaulted the lead female character. You know, the sexy 70s music kind of made it seem like we were supposed to laugh at him, or that maybe it wasn't quite as serious as it was portrayed. And as an audience member, I found that really confusing. I did not know what I was supposed to be thinking or feeling, and it wasn't in an interesting and ambiguous way. It felt like the pieces just didn't connect. And so the final point that I want to talk about with Box of Freedom is their actual portrayal of sexual assault and violence against women in this play. So the play has an extremely graphic rape scene in it. Not only that, but they do depict a lot of throwing and beating of the main character, the woman. And to me, anytime you're going to portray something like that, whether it's on film or even describing it in some kind of podcast, or if you're going to portray something like that on stage, to me, it needs to be an absolute necessity, right? Like, you need to critically examine the reasons why you want to portray something that's violent and triggering and very extreme. I think truly what bothered me the most about the portrayal of the rape and the violence and the assault is that these things served no function to further the narrative of the show, and they also weren't critically examined within the piece. So there was no engagement with, you know, why do women get raped? Why do women, you know, get beat up? Why are people violent towards women? It was just something that kind of happened in front of us in a very over-the-top, dramatic, violent and graphic way. So this kind of made it feel like it wasn't really there to, again, like further the narrative at all, or you know, move the story forward, or to help us engage with these topics. That it was only there to kind of heighten the intensity of the show and to create drama and to make us feel as though we were watching something that was exciting and bad and horrifying, and that made it inflammatory. It also made it extremely triggering, right? Like, for someone who maybe had experienced a similar violent sexual assault without any prior warning before coming to this show, that can cause all kinds of, you know, post-traumatic stress disorder, panic attacks, anxiety. It can have serious repercussions when it isn't done carefully and compassionately. And that also really bothered me about the portrayal of sexual assault in this show. So in my experience, a really, really good rule of thumb when you're dealing with topics that can trigger people, trigger their post-traumatic stress disorder, cause anxiety, is asking yourself, is this absolutely necessary? Can I portray this event in a different way? Does this event further the plot? Am I critically engaging enough with this topic? Am I asking myself deep enough questions? And, you know, you can always reach out to someone who's maybe open about having been a victim of sexual assault or having been a victim of violence, and talk to them about it and ask them about their experience and find out if this is something that they would find triggering, you know, and not that they even owe you an answer to that, or that they owe you their time, or they owe you, you know, to share their experience, but that if you're going to engage with something, it's important to realize that this is a very real thing for some people. So another thing that I wanted to mention is that after these events occurred on stage, the actors and the characters didn't really seem to have any profound reactions to it. They just kind of kept going with whatever was happening in that moment. Now, I understand that there was some like flashing back and forth between timelines in the show. However, no repercussions were really seen from those events. No further engagement was had with those events. And so when on stage even, there isn't any repercussion, there isn't any critical engagement with what has just happened, that makes the audience feel as though, you know, oh, we're not critically engaging with the subject, this just happened. It just happened in front of us, and now we have to move on from it. So doing that can also really, really minimize the experiences of people who had these things happen to them in real life. Minimizing an event like that, like a catastrophic traumatic event, can minimize that experience for people who have truly experienced it. And that's also something to be aware of when we're portraying these things on stage. We really want to hear from other people who have seen this show. So if you went to go see Box of Freedom and you had similar thoughts to me, or very, very different thoughts, or you just want to kind of maybe ask more questions or talk about it, we are open. So leave a comment. You know, you can even send us just like a direct message if you want to talk about it in private. I know that this stuff can be really sensitive. So, you know, feel free to just reach out to us in any way that you want to or that you're comfortable with. My name is Madison Steele. I just reviewed Box of Freedom, written and directed by Ailina Zhivago at Studio 1398 as a part of the 2018 Vancouver Fringe Festival. Like, subscribe, comment on the video, theateraddicts.com. Just let us know.